dare you show your face here after what you did?
I have every right to be here.
At 5:48 a.m. on a Thursday in late September, I walked down the gravel path to the dam control house, unlocked the door, and opened the spillway gates. Then I walked back to my porch, sat down, and watched 19 acres of private water begin to drop. By 8 a.m., the lake was 3 inches lower. The HOA's docks, 16 of them, driven into my lake bed without my permission, were sitting lower on their pilings. The 139 vacation cabins built on my shoreline over the previous 14 months were still gleaming in the morning light. By noon, the lake was 11 inches lower. 3 of the lower cabin lots had water moving toward their foundation edges. Douglas Farr called at 2:04 p.m., then 2:31, then 3:17, twice at 4:02, then 5:45, 6:14, and 6:30. 7 calls. I answered none of them. 14 months earlier, a development letter had arrived in my mailbox. I called my property attorney. She read the 1987 easement, 4 pages, one afternoon, and called me back. The construction prohibition is explicit. Your water management rights are protected. They have no legal authority for any of this. Then she said the 4 words that decided everything. Say nothing. Let them build. I opened a new folder on my desktop, typed the label, and saved the letter as the first file. Then I went to find my camera. Hold up before we start. Where are you tuning in from today? Show some love by hitting like and subscribing for more wild stories like this. The dam control house sits at the southern end of Harrow Lake, at the bottom of a gravel path that Elliot Crane has walked so many times over 19 years that his boots find it in the dark without any particular effort from him. He walks it at 5:48 a.m. on a Thursday in late September, in the gray pre-dawn quiet before the light has fully committed to the day, the lake surface flat and silver to his left, through the tree line. The air carrying the particular cold edge that arrives in this part of the Lake District when summer finally decides it is finished. He is not rushing. He has his keys in his right hand and his coffee in his left, and he walks the path the way a man walks towards something he has been thinking about for 14 months, and has finally decided the time for thinking is over. He reaches the control house, unlocks the door, and steps inside. The gate mechanism occupies the center of the small concrete structure. A hydraulic control panel he has operated through 19 years of seasonal water management, 19 years of spring flooding adjustments and summer level maintenance and fall drawdown preparation. He knows every lever and gauge on it the way you know any piece of equipment you have used longer than some people have held jobs. He sets his coffee on the shelf beside the panel, looks at the primary spillway gate control for a moment, and turns the release valve to its full open position. He listens to the mechanism engage, the low, hydraulic groan of the gate lifting, the change in the sound of the water below the dam as the spillway opens and the lake begins, slowly and then with increasing purpose, to move. He picks up his coffee and walks back outside. The release is not dramatic from where he stands. There is no wall of water, no theatrical cascade. The spillway opens, and the lake simply begins doing what water always does when you remove the thing holding it back. It finds the lowest available path and moves toward it with the quiet, unhurried certainty of something that has been waiting for permission. The outlet channel below the dam picks up the increased flow and carries it south into the watershed creek. The surface of Harrow Lake, 19 acres of private water that Elliot has owned and managed since 2004, begins to drop. He walks back up the gravel path to his house and sits down on the porch. He does not call anyone. He does not send a letter to the Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA, whose 139 newly constructed vacation cabins now line the northern and eastern shorelines of his lake, built over the previous 14 months on a 1987 recreational easement that grants HOA members the right to swim and fish in the lake on summer afternoons, and does not, in any clause or provision or reasonable interpretation, grant them the right to construct a 139-unit vacation cabin development on the shoreline. He does not file a notice. He does not send a warning. He opens the spillway gates and sits on his porch and waits for the lake to do what the lake does. By 8 a.m., Harrow Lake has dropped 3 inches. The change is visible from the porch, a thin, pale band of exposed lake bed appearing along the northern and eastern shorelines, the rock and silt below the waterline, emerging into the morning air for the first time since the spring water table peaked. The HOA installed boat docks along the northern shore, 16 of them, constructed without Elliot's authorization and without any permit he had ever been shown, are sitting slightly lower relative to their pilings than they were the previous evening. Not dramatically, not yet. By 10:30 a.m., the lake has dropped 7 inches. The docks are sitting in 8 inches of water at their outer ends and 3 inches at the shore connections. The lower cabin lots along the eastern shore, the 12 units built on the section of shoreline that sits closest to the natural outflow gradient, the section that Elliott's hydrological assessment had flagged as the first area affected by gate open water levels, are showing exposed mudflat between the cabin foundations and the receding waterline. The gravel access paths the HOA had installed between the lower cabin lots and the lake edge are sitting in soft, wet ground. By noon, Harrow Lake has dropped 11 inches. The docks are in 6 inches of standing water and mud. 3 of the lower cabin lots have water moving toward their foundation edges from the redirected outflow pattern the hydrologist had mapped in precise detail 8 months ago, sitting in a report in the 4-inch binder on the table beside Elliott's coffee. The lake looks wrong to anyone who has been looking at it for the past year. The shoreline geometry altered, the familiar summer waterline replaced by a pale exposed band of lake bed that runs the full length of the northern and eastern shores like a bathtub ring made of rock and dark sediment. Elliott's phone rings for the first time at 2:04 p.m. The screen shows a number he has never saved but recognizes, Douglas Farr's cell, the same number that had appeared on 2 letters delivered to his mailbox over the previous 14 months, both of which Elliott had photographed and added to the binder without responding to. He watches the phone ring. He watches it stop. He sets it back on the porch railing and picks up his coffee. Douglas calls again at 2:31 p.m., then at 3:17 p.m., then at 4:02 p.m., twice within 4 minutes, as if the second call might produce a different result than the first. Then at 5:45 p.m., when the afternoon light is going gold across the lake's surface, and the exposed lake bed along the northern shore has dried enough at the edges to show the pale, chalky color of sediment that has not seen air in years. Then at 6:14 p.m. and again at 6:30 p.m., 7 calls. Elliott does not answer any of them. He is watching the lake. There is a specific quality to the view from his porch that he has thought about occasionally over the 14 months of construction. The particular contrast between what the lake looked like before the HOA arrived and what it has looked like since. Before, the northern and eastern shorelines were undeveloped, tree-lined, the lake bed sloping gradually into the water without interruption. After, they are lined with 139 timber frame vacation cabins in 4 repeating floor plans, their private docks extending into his water, their gravel access paths cutting through the shoreline vegetation, their outdoor lighting casting reflections across the surface on clear nights. He has documented all of it, every stage of construction, every dock installation, every foundation pour on the 61 lots that his surveyor has certified sit entirely outside the easement boundary and directly on land Elliott owns in fee simple. The documentation is in the binder. The binder is 4 inches thick. It has been 4 inches thick for 3 months, fully assembled and sitting on his shelf, waiting for the morning he decided to open the gates. He had made that decision not in a single moment, but gradually, the way most significant decisions are actually made, through the accumulation of smaller realizations over a long period, until the conclusion becomes obvious and the only remaining question is timing. He had decided in March, when the 41st cabin frame went up, and Douglas sent his second progress letter with the same cordial condescension as the first. He had confirmed it in July, when the docks appeared in the water without any communication to him whatsoever. He had fixed the date in early September, after the last cabin sold, and Douglas sent the community announcement describing the Harrow Lake Cabin Community as the most successful development project in the HOA's 30-year history. He had read that announcement, added it to the binder, and called Margaret. She had told him the record was complete, and had been for 3 months. She had told him everything was in order. She had told him the filing packages were prepared, and could go to the court clerk within hours of his signal. He had told her Thursday morning. He had not told Douglas anything. He had not told the HOA anything. He had said nothing to anyone outside of Margaret and Carl for 14 months. 14 months of documented silence, while 139 cabins went up on his shoreline, and Douglas Farr sent letters and held community meetings, and described the lake as though it belonged to his vision for it, rather than to the man who had owned the deed since 2004, and had been sitting on a porch across the water, keeping records the entire time. The sun drops behind the western tree line at 6:47 p.m. The lake goes from gold to gray in the space of a few minutes, the exposed shoreline band darkening as the light leaves it, the cabin lights along the northern shore coming on one by one in the early evening. Douglas's last call had come in at 6:30. Elliott's phone has been quiet for 17 minutes. He looks at the lake for a while longer. Then he picks up the binder from the table beside him, carries it inside, and sets it on the kitchen counter next to his keys. Tomorrow morning, Margaret will file 41 pages of complaint, certified survey, water rights assessment, hydrological report, and 14 months of construction photographs in county court. Tomorrow afternoon, a process server will deliver the filing to the HOA's managing director at the Ridgecrest office. Tomorrow evening, Douglas Farr will hold an emergency community meeting and tell 139 cabin owners that the situation is a legal misunderstanding that will be resolved quickly. He will not mention paragraph 14. Elliot does not know yet what Douglas will say tomorrow evening, or what the cabin owners will do when they read the complaint themselves, or exactly how many weeks it will take for the whole structure of what Douglas built, the cabins, the board presidency, the confident announcement of a 30-year development legacy, to come apart under the weight of a document that Margaret had been assembling in silence since the day the first development letter arrived in Elliot's mailbox. He knows the gates are open. He knows the lake is 11 inches lower than it was this morning. He knows the binder is 4 inches thick, and every page of it is dated and certified and ready. He goes inside, makes dinner, and goes to bed at a reasonable hour. The lake keeps dropping through the night, quiet and purposeful, doing exactly what water does when the man who owns the dam decides it is time. 14 months earlier. The letter arrives on a Monday morning in late July, tucked between a utility statement and a property tax notice in the mailbox at the end of Elliot's driveway. The envelope carries the Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA letterhead, a logo Elliot recognizes from the occasional community notices that arrive twice a year regarding shoreline maintenance schedules and seasonal access reminders. He opens it at the mailbox the way he opens most mail, standing in the morning sun without any particular expectation of what is inside. He reads the first paragraph, then he reads it again. The letter informs him, in the measured and carefully constructed language of a board that has clearly spent time on the phrasing, that Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA has approved a residential development project on the northern and eastern shorelines of Harrow Lake. 139 vacation cabin units, it says. Regional contractor engaged. Construction scheduled to begin the following spring. The board is excited to share this vision for the future of the Harrow Lake community, and looks forward to the positive impact the development will bring to the surrounding area. The legal basis cited, a recreational easement granted to the HOA by the lake's previous owner, a man named Robert Calloway, in 1987. Elliot reads it a second time, slowly, standing in his driveway with the morning warming around him. He reads the easement citation. He reads the construction timeline. He reads the closing paragraph, which invites him to contact the HOA community liaison with any questions, and is signed, in a clean and confident hand, by Douglas Farr, board president, Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA. He folds the letter, puts it in his shirt pocket, goes inside, and calls Margaret Voss. Margaret has handled Elliot's land and water rights documentation since the year he purchased the Harrow Lake Dam property in 2004. She is a property and water rights attorney who works out of a two-person office in the county seat, specializing in exactly the kind of lakefront ownership, easement, and riparian rights matters that the Lake District generates with reliable regularity every decade or so when someone decides to test what a document from 1987 actually permits. She is thorough, unhurried, and has the particular quality of confidence that comes not from certainty about outcomes, but from 20 years of knowing exactly which documents to read and exactly what they mean when you read them correctly. Elliot reads her the letter over the phone. She listens without interrupting. When he finishes, she asks one question. Has he ever seen the 1987 easement document himself? He tells her no. He had reviewed the easement summary in the title report when he purchased the property in 2004, which described it as a recreational use easement with standard seasonal access provisions. He had never pulled the original document. Margaret tells him she will have it by that afternoon. She calls the county recorder's office, requests a certified copy of the 1987 easement by grantor name and document date, and has it in her hands within 2 hours. She reads it in full at her desk, start to finish, without skimming, the way she reads every document that is going to matter. Because the difference between what a document appears to say and what it actually says is almost always in the section that someone in a hurry decided to skim. The easement is 4 pages. Margaret reads all 4. Page 1 establishes the parties, Robert Calloway as grantor, Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA as grantee, and the property description. Page 2 describes the grant in specific terms. The right to use the lake surface and the shoreline margin, defined as the area within 15 feet of the high water mark, for recreational purposes during daylight hours between May 1st and October 31st of each calendar year. The recreational purposes are enumerated: fishing, swimming, non-motorized watercraft use, shoreline walking. The enumeration is followed by a limiting clause. The foregoing recreational rights shall constitute the full extent of the grant, and shall not be construed to include any right of construction, permanent installation, commercial use, or exclusive occupation of any portion of the easement area. Margaret underlines that sentence. Page 3 addresses the relationship between the easement and the property owner's existing rights. It contains a clause that she reads twice, because it is the kind of clause that a careful grantor puts in a document specifically to prevent the situation that Douglas Farr's letter describes. The clause reads, "All use of the easement area by the grantee and its members shall at all times remain subject to and subordinate to the property owner's water management rights, including, without limitation, the right to operate, adjust, and manage any dam, gate, weir, or water control structure on the property at the owner's sole discretion. Nothing in this easement shall be construed to limit, condition, or abridge the property owner's water management rights, and no use of the easement area shall create any claim against the property owner arising from the lawful exercise of such rights." Margaret underlines that paragraph in full. Page 4 contains the standard recording language and Robert Calloway's notarized signature. She calls Elliot back at 3:15 p.m. She does not begin with a summary. She begins by reading him the limiting clause from page 2, the sentence establishing that the enumerated recreational rights constitute the full extent of the grant and shall not be construed to include any right of construction or permanent installation. She reads it the way you read a document to someone when you want them to hear the words, rather than your interpretation of them. Then she reads him the water management rights clause from page 3. Then she is quiet for a moment. "Robert Calloway knew what he was doing when he wrote this," she says. "He gave the HOA the right to swim in the lake and fish off the bank. He preserved everything else. The construction prohibition is explicit. It is not implied. It is not arguable. It is written into the grant definition as a direct exclusion. And your water management rights are not just preserved, they are specifically declared superior to any easement use." Elliot asks what that means for the 139 cabin development Douglas is proposing. Margaret's answer is 3 sentences, delivered in the flat, certain register of someone stating measurements rather than opinions. The easement allows HOA members to swim in the lake on summer afternoons. It does not allow them to build 139 cabins on the shoreline. And Elliot's right to operate the dam at his discretion, at any level, at any time, for any water management purpose, is explicitly protected and cannot be challenged on the basis of what happens to the shoreline when he exercises it. Elliot is quiet for a moment. He asks what they should do, whether to send a cease and desist letter, whether to contact Douglas directly, whether to file for an injunction before construction begins. Margaret tells him to do none of those things. He asks her to explain. She tells him that a cease and desist letter gives Douglas the opportunity to retain a land use attorney, who will spend 6 months arguing about easement interpretation, while construction is delayed and nothing is built. An injunction hearing puts the matter in front of a judge before there is any physical evidence of the violation. Contacting Douglas directly gives him the chance to engage consultants, find workarounds, amend the project scope in ways that might complicate the legal picture. Right now, Margaret says, the easement language is clear, your rights are documented, and they haven't built anything yet. The moment they build something, the violation becomes physical and permanent and photographable. A construction trespass with 139 completed structures on the ground is a fundamentally stronger case than a threatened easement misuse before a shovel touches the dirt. She pauses. Say nothing. Document everything. Let them build. Elliot stares at the window. Outside, through the tree line at the end of his property, the northern shoreline of Harrow Lake is visible in the afternoon light. Undeveloped, tree-lined, the lake bed sloping quietly into the water, the way it has since before anyone in Ridgecrest was born. He thinks about 139 cabins on that shoreline. He thinks about the docks in his water. He thinks about Douglas's letter and its confident, proprietary tone. The tone of a man who has read a document from 1987 and decided it says what he needs it to say. He thinks about what the lake will look like when the gates are open. Trust me, Margaret says. Let them build. Elliot looks at the lake for a long moment. All right, he says. He hangs up, opens a new folder on his desktop, types the label Harrow Lake, HOA Development, and saves a photograph of Douglas's letter as the first file inside it. Then he goes to find his camera. Construction begins on a Monday morning in the second week of April. Elliot hears the equipment before he sees it, the same low diesel rumble he had been expecting since the previous July, arriving now with the particular finality of something that has been announced and delayed and discussed and is finally, irrevocably, here. He is at his kitchen window with his first coffee of the morning when the sound reaches him across the lake, and he sets the cup down, picks up the binoculars from the shelf beside the back door, and walks out onto the porch. Across the water, on the northern shoreline, 2 excavators are moving through the tree line at the edge of the first 12 lots. A flatbed truck is parked along the access road behind them, partially visible through the trees. The crews are organized and efficient, a regional development contractor that builds vacation cabin clusters across the Lake District with the practiced, impersonal competence of a firm that has done this same project in different locations enough times to have the sequencing memorized. They are not here to admire the lake. They are here to build 139 structures, on a schedule that Douglas Farr has apparently already announced to the cabin buyers. Elliot watches through the binoculars for several minutes. Then he goes inside, retrieves his camera, comes back to the porch, and begins documenting. He photographs the excavators positioning on the first 12 lots. He photographs the survey stakes already driven into the ground along the lot boundaries, stakes that his own surveyor will later confirm extend, in 61 cases, beyond the easement boundary and onto Elliot's fee simple land. He photographs the access road cut through the northern shoreline vegetation, the first raw earth of the disturbed lakebed margin, the equipment tracks and the soft ground at the water's edge. He notes the date and time in a log he has started in a fresh notebook, the first entry written in the same steady hand he will use for the next 14 months of daily observations. He does this every morning. By the end of April, the first 12 foundation pads are poured. By mid-May, framing is up on 16 structures, bare timber skeletons standing against the spring tree line, their floor plans identical in the repeating pattern of a development built for volume rather than individuality. Elliot photographs each framing stage from his porch across the lake, the camera's zoom lens pulling the northern shore close enough to read the lumber grade stamps on the framing members. He photographs the first dock installation in early May, 2 HOA crews working from a barge, driving dock pilings into his lakebed without any communication to him, without any permit he has been shown, without any acknowledgement that the water they are working in belongs to someone who has not authorized their presence in it. He photographs it all. He adds every photograph to the growing file on his desktop. He says nothing to anyone. The first neighbor contacts him in late April. Her name is Sandra, and she owns a property on the western shore that gives her a clear view of the northern construction activity. She stops Elliot at his mailbox one morning and asks, with the careful politeness of someone who is not sure how to frame the question, whether he is aware of what is being built across the lake, and whether he has any concerns about it. Elliot tells her he is aware of it and is handling the situation. She asks what that means. He tells her he appreciates her concern and changes the subject to the weather, which has been unusually dry for April. She walks away looking slightly unsatisfied, which is the only outcome available when someone gives you an answer that is technically complete and practically uninformative. The second neighbor is a man named Ted, who lives 2 properties north of Elliot along the dam road, and who has fished Harrow Lake every summer for 12 years. He calls Elliot in early May and asks directly whether Elliot has been paid for the development rights, or whether something has gone wrong with the easement. The question carries the edge of someone who suspects the latter, but is hoping for the former. Elliot tells him nothing has gone wrong that cannot be corrected, and that he is handling it in the appropriate way. Ted asks what the appropriate way is. Elliot tells him he cannot discuss the details at this stage. Ted hangs up after a few more seconds of silence, and Elliot has no doubt that Ted will conclude he has been bought out or defeated. He accepts that conclusion without disturbance. Let them think what they need to think for now. The third neighbor is Carl. Carl owns the land parcel immediately east of Elliot's dam property, 23 acres of mixed woodland and shoreline that he purchased 30 years ago and has maintained with the quiet, attentive care of a man who spent his career as a licensed surveyor and still cannot walk across a piece of land without unconsciously reading its boundaries. He has watched the northern shore construction with professional attention and personal unease since the first week of April, and when he appears at Elliot's fence line on a Saturday morning in late May, he does not come with questions. He comes with a survey map he has pulled from county records, an old plat of the Harrow Lake parcel, overlaid with a hand-drawn sketch of where the construction activity appears to be occurring relative to the recorded easement boundary. He sets it on the fence post between them and taps a section of the northern shore with one finger. 17 of those lots are outside the easement line, he says. Maybe more. I can't confirm from county records alone. You'd need a field survey. But the framing positions I can see from my property don't match the easement boundary on this plat. Elliot looks at the map for a moment. He does not confirm or deny Carl's figure. He does not tell Carl about Margaret, or the legal record being assembled, or the gate mechanism at the southern end of the lake that he has been thinking about with increasing clarity for the past 3 months. He simply nods. Carl looks at him for a moment with the patient, measuring expression of a man who has spent 30 years reading landscapes, and understands that the most informative response is sometimes no response at all. He picks up his map and goes home without asking anything else. That is the response of a man who recognizes when someone is playing a longer game than they are announcing. Elliot makes a note in his log. Carl, aware, will not interfere. Douglas sends the first construction progress letter in May. It is 2 pages, cordial in tone, describing the project schedule and the board's vision for Harrow Lake as a premier vacation destination in the Lake District. It notes that the first 16 cabin units are ahead of schedule, and that the board expects the full 139-unit community to be available for the summer market. It invites Elliot to attend a community meeting at the HOA clubhouse the following Tuesday evening to hear more about the project and share any thoughts he might have about the lake's future development. Elliot photographs the letter front and back. He adds it to the binder. He does not attend the meeting. He does not respond to the letter. By July, 41 cabins are complete or nearly complete. Their new timber exteriors carry the clean, sealed brightness of fresh construction, gleaming against the tree line in the summer light, with the look of something built to be photographed for a real estate listing. Their private docks extend into the lake at regular intervals along the northern shore. 16 of them now, each one driven into Elliot's lake bed without his authorization. Each one photographed by Elliot from his porch on the morning of its installation, and added to the file that Margaret is building into a certified legal record 40 miles away. The summer is long and warm. The lake is full, the water level at its normal summer height, the surface carrying the light the way it always does in August, flat and silver in the mornings, broken and gold in the afternoons. The cabin buyers, many of whom have already closed on their purchases based on pre-construction agreements, begin visiting the northern shore on weekends to check on construction progress. Elliot watches them through binoculars from his porch, small figures moving around the framing and foundations, pointing at views and measuring distances with the proprietary excitement of people who have bought something and are impatient for delivery. He photographs none of them. They are not the story. The foundations are the story. The dock pilings are the story. The survey stakes on the 61 lots that Carl had intuited and that Margaret's retained surveyor is already in the process of formally mapping are the story. Douglas sends the second letter in August. The tone has shifted slightly. Less invitation, more announcement. The project is substantially ahead of schedule. 93 units are complete. The HOA is already planning the community amenity phase. A lakeside gathering pavilion, a boat storage facility, a maintenance road running the full length of the eastern shore. Douglas writes about the transformation of Harrow Lake with the language of someone describing a legacy project, something that will define the HOA's identity for the next generation of residents. Elliot reads the letter at his kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. He reads the part about the gathering pavilion and the boat storage facility and the maintenance road running the full length of the eastern shore. He sets the letter down and sits for a moment. Then he photographs it, adds it to the binder, and calls Margaret. He tells her what Douglas is planning for Phase 2. She tells him it does not matter. Phase 2 will never begin. By the time Douglas is ready to break ground on the pavilion, the legal picture will have changed in ways that make the conversation irrelevant. How close are we? Elliot asks. The trespass survey will be certified within 2 weeks, she says. The water rights assessment is complete. The hydrological report is finalized. I'm waiting for the survey certification, and then the filing package is ready. Elliot looks out the window at the lake. The northern shore gleams with finished cabins in the August light. And we wait until they're all done, he says. Not a question, a confirmation. Every last one, Margaret says. 139 completed, sold, and occupied. No units under construction when we file. No reasonable argument that the project was halted or modified in response to any complaint. By September, 93 units are complete. By October, 114. By December, all 139 are finished, sold, and occupied. Their interiors lit against the cold winter evenings with the warm glow of vacation properties that their owners believe they have purchased legitimately. Built on a shoreline they believe the HOA had the right to develop, on the edge of a lake they have not yet understood, belongs entirely and explicitly to the man across the water who has been watching them through binoculars every morning for 9 months. Douglas sends the community-wide announcement in the second week of December. The subject line reads, Harrow Lake Cabin Community, Full Completion. The body describes the project as the most successful development initiative in the HOA's 30-year history, a transformation of the Harrow Lake shoreline into a vibrant 4-season vacation community that reflects the board's commitment to long-term value creation for its members. He thanks the contractor, the design team, and the HOA staff. He mentions his own leadership of the project with the quiet pride of someone who expects to be thanked for it. Elliot reads the announcement at his kitchen table, adds it to the binder, and closes the cover. The binder is 4 inches thick. He picks up his phone and calls Margaret. When she answers, he tells her it is done. All 139. Finished, sold, occupied. There is a brief pause on her end. Not surprise, she has been tracking the construction timeline as closely as he has, but the particular pause of someone shifting from the preparation phase of a long process to the execution phase. Good, she says. Now we wait for spring. Elliot looks at the lake through the winter window. The northern shore is dark at this hour except for the cabin lights. 139 sets of warm windows reflected in the black water, the docks invisible in the darkness below. How long? He asks. A few months, Margaret says. I want the ground thawed and the lake at full spring level before we move. The hydrological report reads better when the water table is at its peak. Elliot nods at the phone. He has waited 9 months already. A few more is nothing. While Douglas Farr was building 139 cabins on the northern and eastern shorelines of Harrow Lake, Margaret Voss was building something else entirely. She began the same week Elliot brought her the development letter. Not with a filing, not with a cease and desist, not with any outward action that Douglas would ever see or hear about, but with a phone call to a licensed land surveyor named Peter Hallworth, one of 3 surveyors in the county whose certification she trusted for litigation-grade work, and a quiet, specific instruction. She needed a full boundary and easement survey of the Harrow Lake property, and she needed it conducted in stages as construction progressed, so that the final certified plat would reflect the completed development, not the empty ground it started on. Peter understood what that meant. He had done litigation support survey work for Margaret before. He asked her when she needed the first field visit. She told him as soon as the first foundations were poured. That is how Margaret works, not reactively, not in response to what the other side does, but ahead of it, assembling the pieces of a legal record in the sequence that will make the record most useful when the time comes to use it. She has handled water rights litigation for 20 years. She has handled easement disputes, riparian boundary conflicts, dam ownership cases, and shoreline trespass actions across the Lake District and the 3 counties surrounding it. She knows, with the precision of long experience, that the difference between a case that settles quickly and a case that runs for years in discovery is almost always the quality of the documentation assembled before the complaint is filed, not after. So she builds. Peter conducts his first field survey in April, as the first 12 foundation pads are being formed on the northern shore. He works from the 1987 easement document, the original Harrow Lake property deed, and a set of county recorder's plats that establish the boundary lines with legal precision. His first site visit produces a preliminary assessment that confirms what Carl had intuited from county records in May, that a significant number of the proposed cabin lot positions, as staked by the HOA's contractor, extend beyond the easement boundary and onto land Elliot owns in fee simple. He returns in June to survey the completed foundations. He returns again in August when the dock installations are finished. Each visit adds a new layer of certified measurement to the developing plat. Foundation positions, dock piling locations, access road alignments, the HOA's gravel maintenance paths, every piece of permanent infrastructure the contractor has placed on or adjacent to the Harrow Lake shoreline, all mapped against the recorded easement boundary and Elliot's fee simple ownership line, with the sub-inch precision of a licensed survey instrument. The final certified plat, completed in early September when the last cabin foundations are poured, is a document of considerable precision and considerable consequence. It confirms that 61 of the 139 cabin foundations extend beyond the easement boundary and sit entirely on land that Elliot Crane owns in fee simple, land on which the HOA holds no easement of any kind, no development right of any kind, no legal basis for the presence of a permanent structure of any kind. These are not marginal encroachments of a few inches over a disputed line. The trespass ranges from 18 inches on the least egregious lots to 11 feet on the most, a variation that reflects the HOA contractor's apparent assumption that the easement boundary was wherever the development plan said it was, rather than wherever the county recorder's plat said it was. The remaining 78 cabin foundations sit within the easement area. They do not trespass on Elliot's fee simple land in the direct sense, but they constitute permanent construction on an easement that explicitly prohibits permanent construction. A distinction that matters legally because it means the HOA's liability runs on 2 separate tracks simultaneously. 61 counts of direct trespass, 78 counts of easement misuse, 139 structures that should not exist in any legal sense on the shoreline of Harrow Lake. Peter delivers the certified plat to Margaret's office on a Tuesday in mid-September. She reviews it that afternoon, confirms the methodology, and calls Elliot that evening to tell him the survey is complete and certified. She does not file it. Not yet. The second piece of the record is the water rights assessment. Margaret retains a water rights specialist, a consultant named Dr. Frank Osei, who works primarily with municipal water authorities and private dam owners across the region, and whose written assessments carry the weight of someone who has testified as an expert witness in state water court 11 times and been qualified every single time. She gives him the dam deed, the 1987 easement document, and a summary of the development project, and asks him to produce a formal written assessment of Elliott's operational rights under state law. Dr. Osei's report runs 18 pages. Its conclusions are unambiguous. Elliott's right to manage the water level of Harrow Lake is a property right attached to the dam deed. It travels with the land. It cannot be separated from ownership of the dam structure, and it existed in its current form before the 1987 easement was granted, and is therefore not subject to modification by that easement or any subsequent easement granted without explicit written consent from the dam owner. The 1987 easement contains no such consent provision. Robert Calloway did not grant the HOA any right to a particular water level, any right to advance notice of gate operations, or any right to seek damages from the dam owner arising from the lawful exercise of water management authority. The subordination clause on page 3 of the easement, the clause Margaret had underlined on her first reading, is precisely the kind of explicit preservation language that courts have consistently read as a complete bar to easement holder claims against water management decisions. Dr. Osei's summary is one paragraph. It states that Elliott Crane may operate the Harrow Lake dam gates at any level, at any time, for any water management purpose, and that no party holding rights under the 1987 recreational easement has any legal basis to challenge, enjoin, or seek compensation for the consequences of that operation. Margaret adds the report to the binder. The third piece is the hydrological assessment. She retains a hydrologist, a woman named Dr. Sandra Chu, who has mapped water behavior on 12 lake properties in the district, and whose site models have been admitted as evidence in 4 separate state court proceedings. Margaret gives her the Harrow Lake property survey, the dam specifications, and the gate operational data from Elliott's 19 years of seasonal management records, and asks her to model what happens to the 139 cabin lots at various gate positions, specifically at full release versus standard summer operating level. Dr. Chu spends 3 weeks on the assessment. She visits the site twice. She runs the hydrological model against the certified survey plat, mapping flood extent and shoreline recession at each gate position with the precision of someone who understands that her numbers will eventually be read by attorneys and possibly by a judge. Her report is illustrated with color site maps, one for each gate position modeled, showing the shoreline boundary at each water level, the extent of exposed lake bed, and the lots affected by flooding from the redirected outflow pattern at full release. The maps are clear, readable, and damaging. At full gate open position, 31 of the lower cabin lots show water encroachment to their foundation edges. 16 show active flooding of the foundation perimeter. The 3 lowest lots on the eastern shore show water at or above finished floor level under sustained full release conditions. Dr. Cha notes in her conclusions that these outcomes are the direct and predictable result of constructing permanent structures in a hydrologically active shoreline zone without any assessment of the property owner's water management operations. Margaret adds the report to the binder. Through all of it, the survey work, the water rights assessment, the hydrological modeling, she files nothing. She sends no letters to Douglas Farr or the HOA board. She makes no calls to the HOA's attorney. She makes no public record of any kind that would alert Douglas to what is being assembled. The binder grows through the spring and summer and fall in the same silence that Elliott maintains from his porch across the lake. The two of them building toward the same morning from different directions, with different tools, in the same patient quiet. Carl provides a formal witness statement in August, at Margaret's request, a signed, notarized account of his construction observations from the eastern shoreline, his survey assessment of the lot boundary discrepancies, and the dates and nature of his conversation with Elliott at the fence line in May. The statement is 3 pages, technically precise, and signed by a man with 30 years of licensed survey credentials behind his name. Margaret adds it to the binder. On the first day of September, with all 139 cabins sold, occupied, and gleaming against the fall tree line on the northern and eastern shores of Harrow Lake, Margaret calls Elliott. Everything is in order, she says. The trespass survey is certified. The water rights assessment is signed. The hydrological report is finalized. Carl's witness statement is notarized. We have documented every stage of the construction against the easement terms, the property boundaries, and the dam operational record. Elliott is sitting on his porch. Across the lake, the cabin lights are on in the September evening. 139 sets of warm windows reflected in the water he owns. Are we ready? He asks. We've been ready for 3 months, Margaret says. I was waiting for them to finish. Elliot looks at the lake. He thinks about the gates at the southern end, the hydraulic mechanism he has operated through 19 years of seasons, the groan of the release valve, and the sound of water finding the lowest available path. Spring, he says. Spring, Margaret confirms, when the water table is at its peak and the model reads at its strongest. We open the gates, we file the complaint, and we let the record speak. She pauses. Douglas is going to call you, she says. When the lake starts dropping, he is going to call you many times. Elliot already knows this. He has been thinking about those calls for 3 months. I know, he says. Don't answer, she says. He tells her he has no intention of it. At 7 a.m., on the Thursday morning that Elliot opens the dam gates, Margaret Voss is already at her desk. She has been there since 6:30, reviewing the filing package one final time with the particular thoroughness of someone who knows that a document submitted to a court clerk becomes permanent and irreversible, and should therefore be exactly right before it leaves her hands. The package is 41 pages. She has reviewed it 3 times over the previous week. She reviews the cover page one more time this morning. The caption, the case designation, the defendant names. And then she sets it on the corner of her desk in the manila envelope, addressed to the county court clerk's office, and turns to her coffee. She knows the gates opened at 5:48 a.m. because Elliot sent her a 2-word text message at 5:51. Gates open. She had been expecting it. She had gone to bed the previous evening with her filing clothes already laid out. At 9 a.m., with Harrow Lake 3 hours into its descent and Douglas Farr already somewhere along the northern shoreline, trying to understand what he is looking at, Margaret drives to the county court clerk's office and files the complaint in person. She watches the clerk stamp the cover page with the date and case number, accepts her filed copy, and drives back to her office. The complaint, 41 pages, plus exhibits, alleges civil trespass against Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA for the unauthorized construction of 61 cabin structures on Elliot Crane's fee simple property, easement misuse for the unauthorized permanent construction of 78 additional cabin structures within an easement area where the grant explicitly prohibits permanent installation, and unauthorized fixture placement for the 16 dock installations driven into the lakebed without the property owner's consent. It names Douglas Farr individually as a defendant in his capacity as board president, on the basis that the development project had been initiated, authorized, and publicly represented by Douglas in that role throughout its 14-month duration. The exhibits attached to the complaint are the entirety of what Margaret and Elliot have spent 14 months building. The certified trespass survey plat from Peter Halworth, the water rights assessment from Dr. Frank Osei, the hydrological report from Dr. Sandra Chu, with its color-coded flood extent maps, 14 months of dated construction photographs from Elliot's porch documentation, both HOA development letters signed by Douglas Farr, Carl's notarized witness statement, and the complete text of the 1987 easement with Margaret's 11-page legal analysis of every provision the HOA has violated and the precise manner in which each violation occurred. At 10:15 a.m., a process server retained by Margaret's office arrives at the Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA Management Office with 2 copies of the filed complaint, one for the association, one for Douglas Farr individually. The HOA's managing director signs for both at 10:28 a.m. She opens the envelope addressed to the association and reads the first page, then the second. Halfway through the third, the page that describes the 61 cabin foundations confirmed by certified survey to sit entirely outside the easement boundary and directly on Elliot Crane's fee simple land, she picks up her phone and calls Douglas. Douglas is standing at the northern shoreline of Harrow Lake at this point. He has been there since approximately 8 a.m. when a cabin owner on the eastern shore called him to report that the docks appeared to be sitting significantly lower than usual, and that the lake bed was visible below the waterline in a way it had not been the previous evening. Douglas had driven to the site and stood at the water's edge for a long time, looking at the 11-inch drop in the lake level, the docks sitting in mud and shallow water, the pale, exposed lake bed running the full length of the northern and eastern shores like an accusation. He has been calling Elliot's phone for 2 hours. 9 calls, no answer, no voicemail picked up, no response of any kind from the man across the water, who owns the dam and has apparently decided this particular Thursday morning was the appropriate moment to exercise that ownership in the most visible way available to him. Douglas is mid-dial on the 10th attempt when the managing director's call comes through. He switches over. She reads him the relevant portions of the complaint over the phone. She reads him the case caption. She reads him the trespass allegation. She reads him the number, 61 cabin foundations on Elliot's fee simple land. She reads him the part about the dock installations. She reads him the part where Douglas Farr is named individually as a defendant. Douglas stands at the edge of the dropping lake and listens. When she finishes, he is quiet for a moment. He looks at the water. He looks at the 139 cabins behind him, their timber frames gleaming in the morning light, their docks sitting in the mud of a lake that has dropped 11 inches since the previous evening, their foundations sitting on ground that a certified survey has mapped against a property boundary and found, in 61 cases, to be on the wrong side of it. He calls his personal attorney. By noon, the story has moved through the cabin owner community with the speed that bad news always moves through a neighborhood where 139 families have recently purchased vacation properties and are suddenly receiving calls from their own neighbors asking whether they have checked the court filing database. The complaint is publicly available through the county court's online portal within 2 hours of filing, a standard feature of the public record system that Douglas has apparently not considered as a variable in his morning's calculations. Cabin owners call each other. They call the HOA office. They call Douglas directly, repeatedly, with the particular urgency of people who have spent significant money on a purchase that is beginning to look like it may rest on a legal foundation as unstable as the lakebed the HOA drove their dock pilings into. The questions circulating through the community by early afternoon are all variations of the same question, asked in different registers of alarm and anger. What is happening to the lake? Who is Elliot Crane? And why does a man none of them have ever met apparently own the water their cabins are sitting next to? Douglas calls an emergency community meeting for 7 o'clock that evening. He spends the afternoon preparing for it, with the focused desperation of someone trying to construct a narrative that will hold the room long enough to prevent panic from converting into organized legal action. He calls the HOA's general counsel, a land use attorney named Harrison, who has handled the association's real estate matters for 4 years, and who listens to Douglas's summary of the situation with a silence that grows longer and more significant the further into the summary Douglas gets. Harrison tells Douglas he will review the complaint and call him back before the evening meeting. He calls back at 5:30 with a preliminary assessment that Douglas summarizes to no one because it contains nothing he wants anyone else to hear yet. The meeting convenes at 7 in the HOA clubhouse. 61 cabin owners are present in person. Another 40 have joined by video link. Owners who purchased remotely and have not yet visited the property enough to have seen the lake drop. Douglas stands at the front of the room with the practiced composure of a man who has run community meetings for 14 years and knows how to project confidence as a substitute for certainty when certainty is not available. He characterizes the gate operation as an unexpected and unilateral action by the adjacent property owner that the board is actively addressing. He characterizes the court filing as a legal dispute that the HOA's attorneys are reviewing and will respond to appropriately. He uses the phrase legal misunderstanding twice. He tells the room that the lake level will be restored to normal shortly, and that cabin owners should not be alarmed by the temporary change in shoreline conditions. He does not mention the trespass survey. He does not explain what the 1987 easement actually says. He does not read the complaint aloud or offer any description of its specific allegations. He does not mention Dr. Chu's hydrological report, which is attached to the publicly filed complaint as Exhibit C, and which contains color maps showing 31 cabin lots with water at their foundation edges under sustained gate-open conditions. He tells them the situation is being handled and invites questions. 3 cabin owners in the 4th row are not waiting for the question period. They arrived at the meeting having spent the afternoon reading the publicly available court filing with the focused attention of people who have recently spent a significant amount of money and are not interested in the board president's characterization of a document they have already read themselves. Each of them has spoken to a personal attorney during the afternoon. Each of them has a printed copy of the complaint, all 41 pages, tabbed at the critical exhibits, resting on their knees. The first of them, a man named Robert, who purchased 2 adjacent lots on the eastern shore, stands up during the open floor period without waiting to be called on. He opens his copy of the complaint to a tabbed page and reads paragraph 14 aloud. Paragraph 14 describes the 61 cabin foundations, confirmed by certified license survey, to sit entirely outside the boundary of the 1987 recreational easement and directly on the fee simple property of Elliot Crane, who holds clear title to the underlying land by recorded deed. It describes the trespass as permanent in nature, structural in form, and documented by a certified plat produced by a licensed land surveyor following field measurement of every foundation position relative to the recorded property boundary. It states that the HOA had no legal right to authorize construction on this land, that no easement provision grants any such right, and that the 61 structures constitute direct trespass, for which the association bears full liability. Robert reads it in a clear, steady voice. He does not editorialize. He does not look at Douglas while he reads it. He reads it the way you read something when you want the words themselves to do the work. When he finishes, the room is very quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a meeting between agenda items. The specific, weighted quiet of a room in which a significant number of people have simultaneously understood something they did not understand 2 minutes ago. That the property they purchased may sit on land the seller had no legal right to develop. That the easement the HOA cited as its authority explicitly prohibits the construction it used that authority to permit, and that the man who owns the dam and the lake bed and the 61 lots beneath 61 of their cabins has been documenting all of it for 14 months and has just filed 41 pages of evidence in county court. Douglas stands at the front of the room. He opens his mouth once. He closes it. He has no answer for paragraph 14. The weeks that follow the gate opening are the weeks that determine everything. Douglas retains outside litigation counsel the morning after the community meeting. Harrison is a land use attorney who has handled property disputes across the Lake District for 16 years. Not the HOA's regular counsel, but someone Douglas calls because he needs someone whose first look at the situation will be fresh and whose assessment will be honest rather than protective of a prior relationship. He gives Harrison the complaint, the easement document, the trespass survey, the water rights assessment, and a summary of the community meeting. Harrison takes the weekend. He calls Douglas on Monday morning. Douglas takes the call in his car, parked in his driveway, which is where he has been making his most difficult phone calls since Thursday, because the car is the only place in his house where he feels sufficiently alone. Harrison begins with the easement. The language is unambiguous, he says. The limiting clause on page 2 of the 1987 document states explicitly that the enumerated recreational rights constitute the full extent of the grant and shall not be construed to include any right of construction or permanent installation. That is not an implied restriction. It is a direct definitional exclusion written into the grant itself. He has reviewed the relevant state case law over the weekend and has not found a single precedent in which a court looked past an explicit limiting clause of this kind in favor of a broader development right. The argument that recreational easement language can be extended to cover a 139-unit cabin development does not have a viable legal foundation. Douglas asks about the trespass survey, whether the boundary methodology can be challenged. Harrison tells him he reviewed Peter Hallworth's credentials and his field methodology is described in the survey notes. The survey is certified, the methodology is standard, and the boundary positions are tied to recorded county plat monuments. A challenge based on survey methodology would require retaining an expert to find a material error in Hallworth's measurements. Harrison tells Douglas he will request that review if Douglas wants it, but he is telling him now that the probability of finding a material error sufficient to move 61 foundation positions from the wrong side of the boundary to the right side is, in his professional judgment, very low. Douglas asks about the gate operation, whether Elliott had the authority to open the gates without any notice to the HOA or the cabin owners. Harrison moves to what is definite. Dr. Osei's water rights assessment correctly describes the legal framework, he tells Douglas. The subordination clause in the 1987 easement explicitly preserves Elliott's water management authority and declares all easement use subordinate to it. There is no notice requirement in the easement. There is no consent provision. There is no language that conditions gate operation on the dam owner's consideration of the effect on shoreline users. Elliott Crane opened the gates within his documented, deed-attached property rights. The water level change is not actionable. There is no claim available against him for it. Douglas sits in his car for a moment after Harrison finishes that part. He asks the question he has been avoiding since Thursday morning. He asks whether the cabin owners, the 139 families who purchased vacation properties built on a shoreline the HOA developed without legal authority, can bring claims against the association for selling them those properties. Harrison is quiet for a moment. Then he says yes. They can, and several of them are already in conversation with attorneys who will tell them exactly that. The theory is not complicated. The HOA represented to buyers that the development was legally authorized. The certified survey establishes that 61 lots sit entirely outside the easement boundary, on land the HOA had no right to develop. The families who purchased those lots acquired structures built on a direct trespass. A fraudulent misrepresentation claim in that context, that the HOA knew or should have known through reasonable legal review that the development lacked authorization, is, Harrison tells him, a claim with significant merit. Douglas asks what the total exposure looks like if all 3 litigation tracks run simultaneously. Harrison gives him a range. The lower end of the range is not a number Douglas repeats to anyone. The upper end, if the cabin owner claims proceed to trial and produce jury verdicts, is a number that exceeds the HOA's total asset value by a margin that makes the conversation about defending any of it effectively academic. Douglas ends the call and sits in his car for a long time. Over the following 3 weeks, the cabin owner community divides along the fault line that Robert's reading of paragraph 14 opened at the community meeting, and that Harrison's assessment has now made structural rather than emotional. The fracture runs through families who are frightened, through families who are furious, through families who bought in good faith, and are now consulting attorneys about what good faith entitles them to, when the seller's legal foundation turns out to have been built on the same ground as their cabin lots. 37 of them, every owner whose foundation the certified survey places outside the easement boundary and directly on Elliott's fee simple land, retain a single litigation firm collectively within the 3rd week. The firm files a separate civil action against Ridgecrest Lake Community HOA in county court on a Thursday morning, 22 days after Margaret's complaint. The action alleges fraudulent misrepresentation in the property sale process, claiming that the HOA knew, or should have known, through any reasonable pre-development legal review, that the 1987 easement did not authorize permanent construction, and that 61 of the proposed cabin lots sat entirely outside the easement boundary on privately owned land that the association had no legal right to sell or develop. The complaint is 29 pages. It attaches the 1987 easement text, Peter Halworth's certified survey, and a schedule of purchase prices paid by each of the 37 plaintiffs. The purchase price schedule is a column of numbers that, when totaled, represents the collective financial exposure the HOA faces on the misrepresentation track alone, before legal fees, before any multiplier for damages, before the separate trespass remedy in Elliott's complaint is calculated. Carl's notarized witness statement appears as Exhibit D in the cabin owner's complaint, exactly as it appears in Margaret's. His 3 pages of precise, credentialed, dispassionate observation, the construction timeline, the boundary discrepancies he identified from county records, the dates of his fence line conversation with Elliott, carry the particular authority of someone who documented what he saw without any stake in the outcome. His name appears in 2 separate court filings in the same week, attached to the same statement, supporting the same factual record from 2 different directions. He calls Elliott when he sees it. "I'm in both of them," he says. Elliott tells him he always knew he would be. Carl is quiet for a moment. "You knew in May," he says. "It is not quite a question." "I knew in July," Elliott says, "when you nodded." The HOA's insurance carrier receives formal notice of the dual litigation in the 4th week and opens a coverage review. The review takes 8 days. The carrier's letter arrives on a Tuesday. 2 pages, clear in its conclusions. Coverage for the trespass action brought by Elliott is available under the general liability policy with a per-occurrence limit that covers a portion of the anticipated trespass remedy, but not all of it. Coverage for the fraudulent misrepresentation claims brought by the 37 cabin owners is denied. Misrepresentation in a real estate transaction is an excluded category under the association's policy terms, a standard exclusion that the board's insurance broker had flagged in the annual coverage review 2 years ago, and that the board had noted and moved past without any particular concern because at the time there was no pending misrepresentation claim. There is one now. The board meets the evening the carrier's letter arrives. Patricia, the board member who asked Harrison about personal liability at the settlement conference 4 days after the community meeting, and has been quietly assuming increasing authority as Douglas's presence in board discussions has diminished, chairs the meeting. She reads the carrier's letter aloud. She reads the relevant coverage exclusion twice. She asks Harrison, joining by phone, to confirm her understanding of what it means for the 37 cabin owner claims. Harrison confirms her understanding. The room is quiet in the particular way of people who have run out of alternative interpretations to try. Douglas resigns the following Tuesday morning. His letter arrives in the board secretary's email inbox at 8:17 a.m. 1 paragraph, 4 sentences, no explanation beyond the statement that he is stepping down from the board presidency, effective immediately, to focus on his personal legal response to the matters arising from the Harrow Lake development. He does not call any board member before sending it. He does not hold a meeting. He does not issue a community statement. He sends the letter and stops answering his phone, which by that point has been ringing with a regularity that suggests the 37 plaintiffs' litigation firm has begun its pre-discovery outreach. Elliott is standing at the gate mechanism in the dam control house when Margaret calls. He has walked down the gravel path that morning out of habit, not to operate anything, not to document anything, simply because the path is familiar and the control house is where he goes when he needs to think without the lake visible from the windows. He answers on the second ring. Margaret tells him Douglas has resigned. She tells him Patricia has assumed the interim board presidency, and that the HOA's new leadership has contacted her office requesting a settlement conference. She tells him the contact was professional and direct, no posturing, no preliminary maneuvering, just a request for a date and a confirmation that the board understands the scope of what needs to be resolved. Elliot asks what she recommends. She recommends the conference. She also recommends, before it takes place, that he raise the lake back to normal operating level. Not because he is required to, not as a concession, but because the 139 families who purchased those cabins made their purchases in good faith, based on representations that were the HOA's responsibility and not theirs. And because the lake sitting at full release level while they wait for a settlement conference that they did not cause serves no purpose that the legal record requires. Elliot listens. He looks at the gate mechanism. He adjusts the spillway back to standard position. The hydraulic system engages with the same low groan he has heard hundreds of times through 19 years of seasonal operations. Below the dam, the outlet flow decreases. In the hours that follow, Harrow Lake begins to rise, slowly, steadily, the water returning to the northern and eastern shorelines, the way water always returns when you allow it to. By the following evening, the lake is at its normal level. The docks are floating. The lower lots have drained. The surface of Harrow Lake carries the afternoon light the way it always has, flat and even, and entirely indifferent to the legal proceedings being conducted on its behalf. The settlement conference takes place 3 weeks later. Margaret arrives with the 4-inch binder, which she sets on the conference table in front of her, and does not open once during the 2 days of negotiation, because everyone in the room has already read everything inside it, and there is nothing left to establish that has not already been established. Harrison arrives representing a client whose position has no viable defense on any of the 3 legal tracks in play, and who has acknowledged this, implicitly, by requesting the conference rather than filing a response to the complaint. Patricia arrives representing a board that has spent 6 weeks reading documents that should have been read before the first foundation was poured, and has arrived at the table not to argue, but to determine what resolution costs, and how it can be structured to protect the cabin owners, the families who are the association's members, and whose interests the board exists to serve, as much as the legal and financial reality allows. The settlement takes 2 days to negotiate and outline, and another week to reduce to a document that all parties sign. It establishes recorded boundary clarification over the 61 trespassing lots, a formal county recorder filing that acknowledges Elliot's fee simple title and the absence of any HOA development right over that ground, permanently and unambiguously. It requires the HOA to fund a permanent easement amendment process, conducted by a licensed surveyor and filed with the county recorder, that redraws the recreational use boundary with the precision the 1987 document lacked, so that no future board president can look at a vague recreational easement and conclude it authorizes a 139-unit vacation cabin development. It establishes a financial remediation fund for the 37 cabin owners whose lots sit on Elliot's land, structured as a property value stabilization mechanism, funded from the HOA's development reserve. The development reserve that Douglas had spent 14 months building from the assessment fees of the same 139 families he had put at legal risk. Elliot signs the settlement agreement on a Wednesday afternoon at a conference table in a county attorney's office. He shakes Margaret's hand. He shakes Patricia's hand. He drives home. He parks at the end of the driveway and walks the gravel path to the dam control house one last time that day. Not to operate anything, just to stand in the small concrete building at the southern end of his lake for a moment, and be in the particular quiet of a property that is entirely, formally, and in every legal instrument that now exists, unambiguously his. The lake sits below the dam in the late afternoon light. 19 acres of private water, flat and silver, moving with the small wind that comes through the southern tree line in the early evening. 19 years he has owned these gates. 19 years he has walked this path and turned this mechanism through the seasons, and managed this water the way you manage something you intend to keep. One board president with a misread easement and 14 months of unchecked confidence had tried to turn it into something else. It had taken 14 months of silence, one turn of a key at 5:48 a.m., and a 4-inch binder, assembled by a woman who understood from the first afternoon she read the 1987 document exactly how this was going to end. Elliot had never raised his voice. He had never sent an angry letter. He had filed one lawsuit, attended one settlement conference, and opened one set of gates on one Thursday morning. Margaret had done the rest. He stands at the dam control house for a few minutes in the fading light. Then he turns and walks back up the gravel path toward the house, leaving the lake to do what it has always done. Sit there, hold the light, belong to him.